So I was out last week. I know nothing happened in the marketplace, but I'm going to deal with it anyway. So today's video is dealing with Silicon Valley Bank. This is not legal advice. I find this particular topic troubling in just so many ways as I'll go through this. My statements ray Greg Becker, and I understand him to be at least the former CEO of Silicon Valley Bank, are opinion only and not facts as of now. Just let me first state that I'm sympathetic to those who work at any institutions or companies that are somehow disrupted by the failure of Silicon Valley Bank. I'm also concerned about the effect that the failure of the bank will disrupt future innovation, capital for IPOs, and small tech. And that does concern me. And I'm hoping there'll be alternative mechanisms to deal with that. I believe this is indication of the impacts of rising interest rates, inflation, monetary policy, and an ineffective regulatory system, along with greed. I think those all go into play. And this kind of, I think, describes and relates to all the financial problems that we have in the US and that relate to the problems with the financial system itself. This really seems like another case where the regulators may have been asleep at the wheel. I had a personal experience with this particular stock. While I was out of town, I was with somebody who's in a professional capacity, and they were following Silicon Valley Bank stock. I think it was on the 9th. So we were at breakfast, and the stock had already dropped from, I think, approximately $270 a share to about 145 a share. And we started talking about it. And he explained to me that they had done a share offering or requested a share offering to cover up for some losses that they had incurred. And as a result, the stock had taken a big dump. And then we talked about how the market often overcorrects or undercorrects, and he elected to buy into the stock at about $140 a share. This was about 10 o'clock in the morning. Um, so he bought it in about 140 at the end of the day after, so the market closed, and then after market, it closed, I think, around 85. Before it opened the next day, I think I saw it around 39, and he lost all his money in that stock. And that was not, honestly, that was not an insignificant amount of money, and that all occurred in less than 24 hours. If MMTLP and its 65,000 shareholders were such a threat to the financial stability of the country, such that a trading halt had to be provided, why was there no trading halt at any time where a financial institution with contagion possibilities was going down the tubes? Why was it left alone? Was it sheer incompetence, or were regulators assisting competitors to Silicon Valley Bank by letting it fail? With the lack of credibility in regulators, as shown with MMTLP, who knows what really happened with SIVB? Did illegal shorting of stock help contribute to the run and to the failure of the bank? Now let me tell you a little about how the bank got to the position it was in. So Silicon Valley Bank was apparently involved with about 65,000 startups just in the US and thousands of technology startups elsewhere. Most of these startups were of the smaller nature, not like the size of Google, etc. Unlike typical commercial banks, first of all, this was an unusual clientele for banks, but unlike commercial banks, Silicon Valley Bank also provided personal financial services to the tech startup founders and management, and wealth management services. So there was quite a connection between the two. And again, most of the clients of Silicon Valley Bank were not like the FANG stocks. They were small tech companies who were on very shaky financial grounds often and needed financing and available capital. These are the same companies in the same stature that face naked shorting. So that's why it's relevant to MMTLP. Shorting of Silicon Valley Bank probably helped bring the stock down additionally. So Silicon Valley Bank funded a lot of startups. However, in 2022, as interest rates started to rise, it became a risk-off environment. And so all the cash that Silicon Valley Bank had accumulated in 2021 and prior was no longer being borrowed by potential startups because they couldn't really afford to at that point in time. And as a result, Silicon Valley Bank placed their monies in long-term certificates of deposit, treasury bonds, and unfortunately, mortgage-backed securities. And remember, we heard mortgage-backed securities back from the 2008 crash. Now, this is not the same situation where there was a default in the mortgage-backed securities. The problem here was they placed their money at a time interest rates were low before the Fed raised interest rates. And effectively, what happened was all those instruments lost value. So, in effect, the bank lost about $2 billion in value in those long term instruments. Now, the bank started off apparently with about $13 billion in equity, but then you have to subtract the $2 billion, which is about 15% of their equity. And that also depends on the fact that their deposits will remain constant, etc. They sold that portfolio at a loss. But what's interesting is it's long-term instruments, so those instruments do not have to be reported in terms of losses until they are sold. So unlike short-term instruments where a change in value would be reflected on a quarterly basis, on a long-term instrument like this, if they lost $2 billion in value, that would not be reflected on the balance sheet. So it's kind of a trick that unfortunately gives a deceptive picture of the financial condition of some institutions. So we have that as the backdrop. At the same time, about 10% of the bank deposits, and these are deposits from depositors, were loaned out to risky startups. Those startups had monies in Silicon Valley Bank in 2022. They kept their monies in the bank, so there was a somewhat of a mutual relationship. But in 2022, income dried up, but expenses of these startups did not drop. So their deposits at Silicon Valley Bank dropped. And in essence, the equity that existed in Silicon Valley Bank dropped also. There's a question whether Silicon Valley Bank should have used depositor funds at all to fund these risky startups. There's other strategies available where funds will basically set up limited partnership, and limited partners will provide the capital, and there'll be a general partner to manage the fund. But in this case, they didn't. Probably a poor choice. They lost money because of it, and it obviously in this case it strained their capacity to operate. So eventually, Silicon Valley Bank announced they were going to do a share offering the night before the collapse. Perhaps those who were being safe, or those wishing to rid themselves of competitors, before it was announced publicly, Peter Thiel, I believe, was one of them, directed VCs and others with substantial funds at Silicon Valley Bank to remove their monies. The stock dropped further. More people now pulled out their money, and the run on the bank was on. I was literally, while I was eating breakfast and thereafter, watching the ticker drop as it happened. There was no price discovery. It was out of control. Now, that's enough, but on top of that, I have some additional stuff that will piss you off. For example, some are asserting that bonuses were paid out to Silicon Valley Bank personnel hours prior to the collapse. I do not know if that is true, but if it is true, that just is wrong. Second, and this really is a problem. On or about February 27th, 2023, per a stock plan, Greg Becker, the CEO, sold approximately $4 million in stock. Now, a stock plan can be terminated. So the person entitled to the receipt of the options, for example, can elect not to exercise the option, which may terminate that plan. So he can elect not to take the stock and cancel the plan. If Becker did not know the state of his company as of February 27th, 2023, a week or so prior to the collapse, he should be sued for gross incompetence. If he did know, this expletive deleted is at best horribly unethical, in my opinion. However, note, under the rules that are effective through February 27th, 2023, an ironic coincidence in dates, even if Becker knew that his bank was going to close the next day and the stock completely collapse, if it was per a planned sale, it is a perfect defense to a 10b-5 lawsuit for securities fraud. That is ludicrous, offensive, and disgusting. Now, by coincidence, this Becker dude chose the 2/27 date as his option exercise and sale date. Ironically, that's in quotation marks, the SEC changed the rules effective 2/27/2023 regarding sales exercise under stock plans. I believe these changes were effectuated in response to Elon Musk's stock sales and general concerns that these planned stock sales can still be manipulated with regard to communications made in or about the time of a sale. Moreover, the rule now imposes a good faith requirement seemingly at all points in the plan. So the person exercising the plan has to operate in good faith. And I would argue if they knew that their company's going to collapse in a day or a week, they could not sell stock. That to me would not be operating in good faith. But that's just my opinion. So we have new rules, or there will be new rules affecting stock plans. But do we believe the corrupt and incompetent federal regulators will do their jobs? How about Becker and the CEO's timing of the transaction? We do not know if the good faith requirement will apply to old plans, but that will likely be litigated. Congress should call Becker in public and ask him why he did not cancel his stock option purchase and sale. If I knew Becker and he was in front of me, I would call him a total scumbag, just to be honest. It doesn't stop there. On March 7th, 2022, just a couple of days prior to the collapse, Becker appeared at a Morgan Stanley technology conference, played up his company, and referenced no impending collapse. I'm certain people bought stock after this. This is criminal concealment, in my opinion, and prosecutors should go after people like this who undertake conduct that is seemingly and totally unethical. This might be, I don't know, could this be considered stock manipulation, securities violations, 10b-5? and other such misconduct. So, to kind of put it all together, there needs to be a Justice Department investigation into Silicon Valley Bank immediately. A system needs to be set up to replace the funding source of Silicon Valley Bank to fund innovation and provide guarantees. That might be in terms of guarantees by either the government or third parties. Wrongdoers need to be prosecuted. Those that contributed in any way to the run on the bank in bad faith must be publicly exposed and their motives exposed. An emergency mechanism should be set up to deal with payroll for employees caught up in this nonsense. And last but not least, an outside party, a third party, needs to immediately evaluate the FDIC, the SEC, FINRA, and the DTCC and make recommendations as to their future necessity or better alternatives, because what's going on now is not working. Have a good day.